Hello and welcome back right here with ClickMill.co. We got Michael and Zach, and we are discussing and going over the intellectual problem of evil in this video. So the intellectual problem of evil is a philosophical argument from any number of places, but usually from probably an atheistic perspective. And what it says is a God that is all good, okay, so an omnibenevolent God cannot allow evil to exist because how could he possibly exist where evil exists? That doesn't make sense, right? Because he's perfectly good and therefore he can't have evil, but there's evil. Okay, so an all good God or an all loving God cannot allow evil to exist. Evil exists, therefore God does not exist. Okay, and so that is called a logical syllogism, and it just says premise one, premise two, therefore conclusion. So a good God can't allow evil, evil exists, therefore God does not exist. And that is the big argument with the logical problem of evil. Now, who's going to be waging this? People who are trying to prove that it is intellectually, not emotionally, intellectually impossible for God to exist. Now, in the next video, what we'll get into is a couple of responses to well, I guess for this one, we'll go into some responses in this video. Okay, so there's also one more problem of evil that we'll be getting into the next one. Now, in regard to philosophy, and this is a philosophical question that has been around for a long time. In philosophy, questions don't really get resolved. They just get talked about for 1,000 years. And people have new great ideas, but there's still debate on both sides. So it's really quite something when the philosophical community broadly, the people who are professional philosophers, not people like us on the internet necessarily, but when atheistic scholars and Christian scholars and secular scholars and agnostic scholars all sort of agree this is a sufficient answer. That's really rare. And what happened in the 1900s is there came about a consensus on the intellectual problem of evil. And the consensus, after however many thousands of years of debating about this subject, is that it is not within a human's ability to reason to know whether or not God can allow evil or not. And one of the ways in which this is kind of explained is who are we to know what God can or cannot allow? Who are we to know if he doesn't have some kind of reasons that we cannot understand? And we see this in our own lives. Anybody who has a child, if my son is running out into the street in front of a Mack truck, I'm going to take the back of his shirt and I'm going to yank him back as hard as I can. Is he going to get scuffed up? I mean, maybe. Well, what's he going to think about it? He's going to go, oh my gosh, that was so mean. I can't believe you did that. But he's clueless. He's got no idea what's going on. He doesn't know what's going on half the time. He's running around looking at, who knows? He's so distracted. He doesn't even know there's a truck there. The truck is gone before he gets off the sidewalk. So he's got some boo-boos, but he doesn't realize that he just about went to meet Jesus. So he does not understand my intention for why I had to yank him out of the road really fast. And he thinks that's so evil. Well, that is kind of our perspective with God. We don't know why we are not in a position to know the motivations of God and to say why he would or would not allow evil. Okay. And one of the ways in which I've heard this said as well is how do we know that God hasn't constrained the universe to the very minimal amount of evil to allow for something important, say free will? What if there's a world where God allows us to make choices freely and we make bad choices 95% of the time? Well, there'd be a lot more evil in the world. What if this world is the world that allows us to have free choice and relationship with God and also has the minimum amount of evil possible? So maybe he's actually being super good because he's minimizing the evil and he's allowing us to have free choice so we're not robots, something to that effect. Well, maybe that is sufficient reason for God to allow some amount of evil. And then if we were to ask, how much evil is there? is, like, think about this, like, it is possible in philosophy, we would say, there are possible worlds. Okay. In a possible world or an imaginary world, right? It's a mental experiment. Is it possible that the evil thing happens 99% of the time or 100% of the time? Is it possible that people are getting murdered and, their purses of the old ladies are being stolen? And anytime a kid gets on a bike, they immediately fall off and smash their face on the pavement. Is there a world where all of those things could happen all of the time? And I mean, 100% of the time? Sure, there is. But that's not our world. So, what world do we live in? We live in a world where the evil thing, let's just say crime being perpetrated against between people, it's relatively minor. You don't walk down the street and expect to get mugged every day. It's a statistic. It's a thing that happens rarely. The evil thing happens rarely. In, most of the world at this point, when we talk about infant mortality, it's not the majority, it's the minority, because the evil is constrained to some, minority amount. When we talk about, who's getting sick with whatever disease, it's still the minority. And so while bad things do happen, we're not living in a world where we see evil at every single moment. It is still something that is constrained. And so, again, maybe it is within God's ability and within his intentions to allow a certain amount of evil in the world, to also allow something else, maybe free will, maybe something else, like we don't know. And that is sufficient reason for God to allow evil. We do not know, and we're not in a position to know. So the entire academic community has essentially centralized on this idea and said that is logically sound. That is a logically sound reason, because premise one is a good God cannot allow evil, and premise two is evil exists. Therefore, God does not exist. So the way this works is you have to debunk one of the two premises, because that is a logical conclusion. If God cannot allow evil and there is evil, then God cannot exist. Well, nobody's going to say there's not evil, because that kind of makes sense. Seems like there really is some evil around. Even atheists who don't have a grounds for evil says there's evil. So everybody agrees evil exists. So a good God cannot allow evil must be false if there is God and if there is evil. So what a Christian is going to want to do is say, well, I don't agree with premise one. A good God could allow evil, and we're not really in a position to assess the reasons for that, but it's not impossible. So this is the logical argument against the intellectual problem of evil. And again, this has been widely accepted in philosophy as a sufficient solution to this issue. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
How do you do you have any thoughts on how you bridge this over to the emotional?
How do you mean?
Well, I think that it's fantastic that philosophers, whomever they may be, have all agreed that it is sufficient to say that we are not in a position to understand it.
Right.
But that also sounds a lot like, well, we don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, I've given it a lot of thought, and I don't think that it's correct to say that a good God cannot allow evil on
Mm-hmm.
its face, because, when we think about it from maybe more so from God's perspective, um, as a loving father, as a loving father myself, insofar as I could prevent my children from ever encountering a negative experience, at face value, I might say, yeah, I would do that. But then what have I actually done? I've stunted them. I have not given them any agency, any ability to be what they truly could be.
Right.
Um, to to be able to, from God's position, looking at the creation story, create a perfect world and then place my children into that perfect world and give them true agency within the perfection would be a different story altogether.
Right.
But as soon as my children make a bad choice, the
Perfect world's gone.
the perfect world is gone.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I think has to be taken into considerations. The evil that is present in the world, and this isn't just like a metaphysical archetypal thing, although those hold the truths within them. The evil that is in the world is the result of our, and I mean our individually, but also collectively,
Yeah.
choices.
Right.
And
So the humans are made now. Sorry, go ahead.
well, on that note, and of course, this conversation can go down so many different lanes. It's not something to be contained within a short video. On that note, as soon as my children start making bad choices, I now have to allow, and I do mean allow, some degree of consequence
Yes.
so that they can then receive the corrective feedback.
Yes.
And
now,
if
that might
my
be what we call natural evil. Is it, would we say it's not a perfect world when I'm trying to ride a bike that I fall off and I smash my face on the pavement? But in the world that we live in, where it's not perfect and I don't learn how to ride my bike for the very first time, and I'm also not immortal, it's going to hurt when I fall off the bike. Well, that's natural evil, but I also need that to correct my approach to get the thing right. So in a perfect world, that may not be necessary. Maybe, in the Garden of Eden or in heaven or whatever, you get on the bike or the motorcycle and you never get in a wreck, or you get in a wreck and it doesn't matter because you can't die and you don't feel pain. Like, I don't know what that looks like, but in our world, you have to have feedback, and that feedback is painful. And so if you never give your child feedback, this is what I hear you saying, Zach, if you never allow them to come up against sort of the natural evil, they're never going to learn, and they're actually going to have more natural evil later because they never learn the lesson with the small things, right?
Yes, and to expand on it just a little bit, I tell my children, now I'm not perfect, so I don't have all of the right answers, but at the micro the micro world that a 6-year-old lives in, I would say that I have the majority of the right answers. And so when my 6-year-old comes to me with problems or is behaving in any manner, I come to him proactively or he comes to me, I can most of the time give him the right answer. But he doesn't just, we lost Michael. He doesn't just absorb those answers.
No, you can't.
I can, and
them, right?
I can't just give them to him. And at that point, he has now made his choice insofar as he is capable of making choice. And this bleeds over into what's called culpability. Insofar as he's capable of making a choice, he then goes and chooses what he chooses. And sometimes he makes the wrong choice. And then
Right.
I have to, again, allow a certain amount of consequence. And I think that broadening this out,
Yep.
any person who is being intellectually honest, just not even intellectually, emotional, honest on any level, cannot claim to have made all the right choices all the time.
Of course.
And it is more than likely that if you're speaking to someone with enough life experience, they can probably recall at least a single instance, if not multiple instances, of when they made choices that were, all things considered, pretty bad, that should have or even did bring some fairly substantive negative consequences. And so when we look at the world more broadly and the existence of evil, it is truly the result of individual choices amassing into this collective of choosing the evil, of making the bad choice. No one forced that. No, setting culpability aside, which God is capable of discerning perfectly. When you make the bad choice, or when the group, the country, or the whatever makes the bad choices, the bad things then come thereafter. And so,
and maybe
go
what I
ahead.
can do, because I think I see what you're saying. Wait, I think the ultimate message here is it is very possible that one of the motivations, as like you said, as a father, one of the motivations that God, as our father, that he has for allowing, whatever kind of evil is as a feedback mechanism. So we learn how to do better in the future. Because when we do this sort of thing in our country and then the country collapses, we can learn we should not do that in the future. Or when, as an adult, I go and steal someone's wallet and then the justice system puts me in prison, I know in the future, or I should know in the future, not to steal wallets. And these then, in a natural way, bring me more into Christ's likeness, or helps me to better understand the Creator, because he put rules in place that honor the good, more or less, which is essentially the book of Proverbs. Like, if you do this, then you'll get that. And so, yeah, all of this to wrap back around, because I don't want to make this video. We can get more videos, Zach, where we can go way more in depth with this, because I know you love this one. But I want to keep these relatively short.
Okay.
But yeah, with that, the intellectual problem of evil is the insistence that God cannot exist if evil exists, and evil exists. So therefore, God does not exist. And when people posit this, you can immediately know they're arguing from a very weak ground, because this isn't even what the experts believe anymore. Not the atheists or the agnostics or the secular or the Christian, or is it like the philosophers no longer are going to argue that perspective. So someone who's arguing that has not really gotten to know the academic literature or what the experts are actually saying. So that's a pretty weak argument, and you can pretty much just say that. And if they're like, well, I don't care what the experts say, well, then where are you basing your opinion? That's going to be a really good question. Is where's your opinion coming? Well, it's my own opinion. Well, how do you know? How do you measure your own opinion? And it's not to say that we always need to take the expert's opinion, but at the same time, when it comes to these sorts of subjects, it seems like people who study them for a living are going to have a good answer. Where are you basing your opinion? Well, on that magazine. And this gets back to the Columbo tactic that we've talked about in a prior session. And well, where are you basing your opinion? On a Facebook post. Oh, okay. So we can't listen to the experts in all fields, in all worldviews, but we can listen to your Facebook post. Like, I don't understand. Your base is weaker than this base. That's kind of the strongest base you can have, outside of like saying it's biblically accurate in this case. So with that, this is the intellectual problem of evil. In the next video, I am going to touch on one more interesting dilemma that some people have when coming at us or coming at you with the problem of evil. So I'll see you there, and we're going to get into that sort of dilemma. God bless.